Hello, my name is Casey Quisenberry, and today I'm going to go over some tips, tricks, and techniques for how you can debug your code in Unreal Engine 5. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to show you is something that I like to do when I set up code, which is I like to create a little dev-only section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to make a comment. I'm going to call it dev-only. So this is going to be a section that you use to have different cheat codes and different events that you can run specifically for when you're developing the game that you will either delete or disconnect when you're ready to ship the game. So let me show you an example of something like this. So say hypothetically that I need to see what the velocity of the character is at every single frame of the game because I'm developing some physics system or I'm doing something and I just need to see that. I'm going to create a custom event that I like to have for every single one of my games that I have. Every single one of my games that I've made that I call testing values. So I'm going to do here is I am going to get the velocity of my character. Again, you don't have to follow along. This is just going to be an example. So I'm just going to left click and get velocity. Right, so this is going to get the velocity of my character, and I'm going to print a string. So we're just basically going to use a print string, which is a function that basically just shows whatever is connected within this little bubble right here. So right now all it would do is it would say the word hello, but you can plug in basically any variable type into it and it will convert it for you. So here we have a vector being converted to a string. Now this function is currently not being used at all. It's not being called. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my event tick. Right now it's empty. If you have something running off your event tick, all you have to do is make a sequence, plug in whatever you had already up into the then 0, and then plug what I'm about to do into then 1 or then 2 or whatever you have. So I'm going to call this value, which is testing values. And so right here I have this custom event for me so that when I play the game, it's going to show me the velocity of my character at any given moment. And so I like to just have this connected. I always keep it connected to the event tick. And what I will do is if I no longer need it to be running, I will just break the link here. But I always keep this custom event here, and I always keep this calling of the custom event here, just so I can easily, print whatever value I need right here. An important thing to note is, again, when you are actually shipping your game, make sure that you delete this node here and disconnect everything in here. So another thing that I like to do with my print strings is that, say hypothetically we have a boolean that is being changed depending on what we're doing, but we're not exactly sure when it's changing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this is dashing boolean. This was from a previous video. So I'm just going to make a branch. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm only going to print something if it is true. I'm not going to print it if it's false. Well, actually, I'm going to show you a different technique. I'm going to have two strings here. And again, we can type anything we want in here. So I'm going to call this true. So if it's true, we're going to print true. If it's false, we're going to have false. You can also change the color of your string. So I'm going to make this green. I'm going to make this red. So now if I play the game, you see I'm not dashing, so everything is false, everything is false. I hit Q, it goes true, and the second I hit the floor, it goes false. So we can see exactly when our variables are changing from true to false, and this is just a good way to make sure that your Boolean variables are being set correctly and seeing when they're being set and see if there's any lag with your Boolean setting, which allow you to debug your code in a way to make sure everything's set up properly. So again, I couldn't recommend having this little section enough. Another thing that I like to do with this is, say hypothetically you have a game where it's a combat game and you play through the level and you have to have, there's a health system and it's a hard challenging level, but you need to test something that's at the very end of the level. Which I like to have is I will just make a keyboard command. So I like to use the number keys just because typically they're not used. If they're used in your game, obviously, use something else. But I like to use 9 and 0. So I'm just going to get my health variable. And let's just say, since I'm playing through this hard section, I don't actually want to battle the enemies. because I'm trying to test, something at the end, I can just set my health to be, you know, a really big number. That way I don't have to deal with actually making sure that I'm, engaging with the rest of the game when I really just want to test something, towards the end of the level. And you can do this with other variables. So if you are doing a first-person shooter and you need to have ammo to test it, I like to do this as well, where I'll just make it to where I have a lot of ammo. And this is just like a good little thing to have so that you can actually debug your game without having to fully play the game. Speaking of that, there's another trick that was added from Unreal in Unreal 5. They didn't have this on Unreal 4, so you had to struggle more, but they added a new feature called Play From Here. So if I press play here, I'm going to be in the same spot every single time. I'm going to be where this start player character is. But say hypothetically, I don't want to have to play through the entire level just to get to a specific section I want. Say that I want to be here. What you can do is you can right click, play from here, and you will put your character in the specific section that you want. Obviously, this is a small level, so it doesn't look as big. But if you have a large level, it can be very, very effective on playing where you need to play. However, just be a little careful because the way that it works is it's getting the point that you left click, so it's only getting X and Y values, not really getting a Z value. It just tries to place you on the closest floor, so sometimes you might end up in a weird area. If that's the case, just exit the game. And another good tool to use for debugging if you don't want to play the entirety of your level is you can use what's called simulate. So here we have the ability to change the play mode in the settings. So here we have all the different things you can do. If we go to simulate, what that's going to do is going to play the game without the character is essentially what it's going to do. So if we simulate, we can see that simulation is happening. Same thing that would happen if it was in a selected viewport, that event is happening. But we can just, if we want to get a closer look, or if we just want to go to a part of this section, because again, this is a very small map. But if you have a big game, you want to go to a certain section, make sure something's running properly without having to play all the way through it, you can just simulate it. However, of course, this doesn't work if whatever you want to test needs player interaction. But if it's something that doesn't need player interaction, like an AI patrol scheme or like something that simulates in physics or something moving on a spline, you can simulate to see sort of what's happening. So a big issue that can happen when you're working in an Unreal is that you're going to be using the same variables a lot. You're going to be using them over and over again. So because of that, it can get a little messy. You might lose track of where you're using these variables and how you're using these variables, especially if you're working with multiple developers. It can get kind of confusing. So a good tool that you can use is if you right click any value or any variable, you will find this, which says find references. And what that does is it will pull up every single time you use that reference in this blueprint. So if I double click, it'll send me to a different part where I use this same Boolean. If I double click here, it'll show me where I'm setting it. If I double click here, it'll show me another reference to it. And I can see basically everywhere where I'm using it. Even if it's inside a macro or a function, it'll still let me see where these variables are. So this is a good way to double check to make sure that your variables are all set correctly just by going through them one-on-one, making sure everything's okay. But what if you're using variables in multiple blueprint files, like is pretty common? If you hit these little binoculars here, it's going to find in all blueprints. Now this can take a second, especially if you're using the same variable in a lot of blueprints, because it's actually having to search through the entirety of your blueprint. So the bigger the project is, it does, take a little bit of lag. That's why it doesn't automatically do it. However, you can see that it actually lists the actors here. So this is our character that we just searched. But you can see we're also using this function inside of another thing. So if I double click it, it will open it up and show us where it is as well. This isn't actually doing anything. I just added it here for this example. So we can see here in this test actor here, I'm using it here. And this is just a very helpful tool to see where your variables are actually being set. And again, it's not just Booleans. You can use it for, any variable. So I can find references to every single variable that I could ever want or need. You can also do it to components as well. So I have character movement here. I can find references to that as well. So again, this is a very useful tool that'll allow you to save a lot of time and not have to just constantly look around your code. And one last thing, you can also use this for custom events to also find the references of where your custom events are being called as well. So again, this find references is just very, very useful. Now let's go over a pretty common error that you can get in Unreal Engine 5 and an easy way to fix it. So let's say I'm moving around, and let's say that I hit a button that's supposed to do something. So I'm currently hitting the 1 key, which I want to do a certain action, but if the certain action involves another actor, I hit escape, and you'll see that I get this very, very common error You've probably seen this error if you've been coding in Unreal Engine 5. If not, you're probably going to see it again, which is access none trying to read property actor. Now, what this is saying is that you're trying to do something with an actor, and that actor just does not exist, or is just not recognizing that that actor does exist. So I know exactly what it is here. I just added this little thing called destroy actor. However, currently I do not have this actor out in this environment. So Unreal is trying to find this actor, but it can't, which is leading to this error. There's a very, very simple way to fix it. I'm actually going to show you 2 ways. So the first way is to add an isValid node. It's the one with the question mark. And what this is going to do is it's basically going to do a branch check, except the way it's going to find whether or not it is true or false is based on whether it is valid. Now, what valid means is that it simply just exists in the world. So I'm going to put a print string down here, just in case it's not valid. I'm just going to put not valid. And so I go up here, I press 1, and we see nothing happens, and we don't get this error. But I'm going to go ahead and put this actor actually in the game. I hit play, I press 1, and it actually does the intended action, but for the rest of the time it'll do is not valid. Now, another way to do this that I prefer is actually what we can do instead of having to drag off and get another node. If you right click, we can convert this to what's called a valid get, which is just basically going to make it a branch check and a reference at the same time. So it's basically combining the node we just had with a reference node, which I find to be far, far more effective. So we can just drag off here, and so it's going to check if this is valid, and we're going to have the actor reference there as well. So again, it's going to work the exact same. I hit 1, it deletes itself, and the rest of the time it's going to say that it is not valid, and we're not going to get that error. And this is just a really good way of doing it, is just doing that. And I've got it to the point where if I ever reference an actor, I will specifically just make it a valid get. Even if I know it is probably going to be in the environment, I like to have this just because it's going to solve for any potential edge case that I'm not thinking. It's going to make sure that my reference exists in the world, and it's going to be way, way more effective and more efficient. Another great tool that I like to use is called a breakpoint. Now, what this allows you to do is it allows you to see exactly when an event or function is being ran. That way you know exactly when something happens in your code. So let's say that I want to know exactly when I'm pressing the jump button or exactly when I'm trying to jump. What I can do is I can go to this actor, I can right click it, I can go to add breakpoint or toggle breakpoint, either work, add breakpoint, and that's going to add this little red stop sign thing here. So now if I go to my game, if I press play, let's say I walk around and then I hit jump, it's going to immediately stop the game, or it's not going to stop the game, it's still technically running, but it's going to pause the game and show me exactly where my code is, and going to say, okay, this is when this event is being ran. That way I know exactly what's happening. So you can remove it there as well. You can also, again, toggle it, which is going to turn it on and off basically. And again, you can do this for any function. So let's say that I want to have it to where when I take damage, it's going to tell me exactly when that happens. And I'm just going to put out this little enemy that I have that basically when I overlap with it, I take damage. So you can see I'm doing good. I'm moving around. You know, I'm coming up here, and then I take damage and immediately takes me to that point. So you can see exactly how close or how far you need to be from that object to see when you take damage. So again, this can be ran on any event. It can also be ran on any function. So it can be run on save. We want it only to happen on this print string. We have it exactly on that print string. Have complete control on what is happening. You know exactly when every single thing you're possibly running is being ran, and it can give you a lot of important information that way. Another quick tip is if you have a lot of breakpoints in your blueprint, if you go to this debug menu up here, you can go ahead and just either delete all the breakpoints or disable all the breakpoints. That way you're not using them. This is what it looks like when disabled. They're an empty stop sign, but say you want to re-enable them, you can just go here and enable all of them and there'll be a full stop sign. Or again, you can just delete all your breakpoints from the debug menu up here. Now, since you probably saw when I was disabling the blueprints, I'm going to show you what the blueprint debugger is. So this is basically just a nice little menu that helps you see what's going on in your character. So right here we have our breakpoints. If we go here, it'll also just keep a track of every single list of breakpoints we have here. So I went ahead and put one on the jump, and what is this? Oh, this is the event any damage, but it's just calling it by this name. So here we have the two different breakpoints, and as you can see, it keeps mark of whether they're on and off. So if I go here and I disable it and I compile and save, I go here, it'll show you which ones are on and which ones are off. And again, this is just a good way of keeping track of your breakpoints and stuff like that. You can also disable and re-able them from this menu as well. However, you might notice there's an entire field empty here that just says value. What's that about? I'm going to show you that right now. So in order to see what this menu is about, all I have to do is play our game. So if I hit play, we're in our game and we're able to move around. We need to then navigate to the blueprint debugger screen. So if I hit F8, that's going to give me control of my mouse again. It's a little keyboard shortcut. Or you can just, click away or do something like that. And you go over here and you now see there is something in this list. It is our character. Now I'm going to basically just pull this down. It's going to give me a free floating window. That way I can, watch my game. If you have a second monitor, I would recommend just putting this over on your second monitor. That'd be very helpful, but of course, not everyone has one of those. So I'll just show you how to do it if it's a single monitor. If I hit this drop down menu, I'm going to hit self. And if I hit it again, I'm going to get all of my components and then all of my variables. So here you can see this variable is dashing and is jumping. So if I go and I move, we'll see that when I am dashing, it'll change that to true. And when I jump, it's going to change that to true as well. So basically, this is just going to keep track of all of your variables and allow you to see what's happening to them very easily. This can also be used in place of the print string option, but that is just a option that is a little faster and a little easier to keep track of if you only have one monitor. But this is the more proper way of checking out your values. I just wanted to show multiple ways of doing debugging. This is a very valuable tool right here. Now, a way you can organize this so that way you get the most important values, or if there's a specific variable that you want to check out and you don't want to have to navigate through this entire menu, we can actually select certain ones. So let's say that I do want to see when I'm dashing. So I go here. All you have to do is go to any place the variable is being used right here, whether you're getting it or setting it. And if we right click, so you specifically need to right click on the node connection. I'm going to have an example up on the screen. So just right click right on that dot right there on any of your values and you'll be able to do what I'm about to do. We can go down here to watch this value. So, and you see a little magnifying glass is going to appear on this, and if it's connected to anything, it's going to appear on that as well. All right, so if you look at our list here, nothing seems to be different, but if we go over here and we hit play, and we hit F8 again to check on our thing, you'll see that this is going to be separated right here. So it's basically just a way to favorite or pin certain variables to your what's called a watch list is what this little section is called. This entirety right here is the watch list. And when you just select a variable to be watched, you're basically just making it to where it is pinned so you can always see it. So the blueprint debugger tool is going to be a great tool for you to use. Again, you can use the print string that I showed earlier, but this is the more proper way of doing it. However, sometimes I will just use the print string on the event tick if I specifically need to know the numbers every single frame. So if it's something dealing with physics, I usually do event tick. If not, I usually use the blueprint debugger. And this is not just for the character. You can use this in any single blueprint that you have. So I'm in my little test actor here. I go here, blueprint debugger. Again, there's nothing currently there. But if I play the game here, you'll see that I get the actor's values as well. So I get all of its components and all of its variables as well. So you can use this for literally any blueprint that you make. It's an amazing tool. I highly recommend using it. Now let's go over a technique that's going to actually allow you to see what code is being ran and when is being ran just by visually seeing the nodes work. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to play our game. Now we're going to do this for our character. I'm going to show you how to do it for an actor after this. It's a little easier for an actor, but for the character specifically, it's a little harder because if you're using a play start, which I'll explain in a second. So if we get here, right, and we go and we walk around, what we're going to do is we're going to hit F8 again just to get our mouse back. We're going to go to the outliner here, and we're going to find this, our name of our character. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit Edit Blueprint Third Person, and we're going to get this. It's going to be the exact blueprint that we just had open. And you might be wondering, well, what was the point of that? Well, you might notice something up here in this corner has changed. So if I stop simulating, I go back, this is what it looks like normally. So if I exit out of this and I just go and I open it up again, in here you're going to see something called no debug object selected. And what that basically means is that this is just the default blueprint. It's not referencing any specific instance of the code. It is just the base default code. However, to do this technique, we need to actually get the player character that we're going to be using. So that is why we go here, we hit F8, and we edit this. That way we get a reference to the specific instance of our character, which is shown up here by saying, what version of it is. And I'll show you the actor version of that in a second, but for now we're just going to do the character. So an important note to make, it doesn't matter if you have the debug object selected or not. If you edit your code, it's going to change. So don't think that just because you have a debug object selected that makes it to where this is a different blueprint, or you can't edit this blueprint because it won't affect the overall. It doesn't matter. Just edit your code however you want. The debug thing only applies to certain things, but you can change your code as much as you want. And it'll be changed in the overall system as well. So say, again, I want to know when I dash. I'm just going to go here. We're going to do the same thing. For this one in particular, even more so than the debugger, it is really, really good if you have a second monitor. So I highly recommend using that if you have access to one. If not, you can, of course, do it. It is just going to be a little trickier for you. I'm going to do it on one monitor for recording purposes and to show you that it is possible. So again, we're going to look here. We're going to zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to play here. So I'm back in my game moving around. If I hit Q, you'll see that little line right there became red. So it's a little hard to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom it in right here. And I'm basically going to do the reverse of what I just did. So again, I still have this selected. I'm going to press play. And it went on another one of my monitors. But let me pull it up. Now I have this little example thing that I can have open. So let me shrink this down a little bit. So we're going to play it over here. And it's going to be a little finicky. So the way this code currently works, and you know this if you've seen the video where I set it up, is Q is just basically going to run through here. And then on event landed, we are going to reset the values that are set in the dash. So we go here and we're playing. I hit Q. You see that red line is showing exactly what is happening. So we go through and it's going to do red line. Once it becomes static again, that means we're no longer running that code. So let me show it on maybe perhaps a little easier of an example. Let me go to my sprint code. So we have a simple, if you press it, it sprints. If you release it, it doesn't sprint. So I'm going to press play again. So I'm walking around. I hit shift. We see it becomes that red dot. It's not staying for the entire time. It's just happening when I press the button. But if I release, it shows it's running again. And for a clear example, let me go and actually hook up this thing right here. And I'm going to go to my event tick, press play. As you can see, the event tick is always running because that's the, how the event tick works. It's going to be sending that constantly going. So that's what the node network is going to look like if your code is running. And then let me show you what's happening over here. We can see since this is always running, this is of course always running as well. We can also see it from the movement input. Going to be moving, and anytime I'm moving, it's going to be acting. If I stop moving, it's going to stop interacting with that line of code. This is very valuable if you have, like a large branch network, something that's checking multiple different booleans to seeing if multiple different things are true or not, because you can see exactly what is being true or false. As you can see here, it is showing, true or false right there. So let me pull this up again. This is relating to our dashing. So we can always see if a boolean is true or not. So if I dash, it changes. And that's just another way to see, okay, I have this giant branch network, but what is actually happening? What branch am I following? You can just follow the red node work to see exactly what is happening. So let me show you how to do it for an actor. So if I just go and I open up the actor, I'm going to get the same thing. in this corner, no debug mode selected. But however, okay, so if I don't have that selected, what happens if you do this is it gives you all the instances. So let me make a couple of these. So the reason why we don't get it with our character is because we're actually spawning in our character. So if you're spawning in any objects, you're going to have to press F8, go navigate towards it and select it and open it up. But if you just have them, pre-placed in the world, you can open them straight from the blueprint at any time. So again, I have 4 of those right there. And I'm just going to be able to select any of these to see exactly what's happening. Okay, I deleted some of the code just to make it a little simpler. So now I'm going to show you that if I walk up to an actor that is not the current debug selected, we see that we don't get that thing. So see something printed right there, but as you can see, the node network actually isn't doing anything. Same if I go to this instance, same if I go to this instance, but if I go to the correct instance I selected, we see that we get the little red node network. So you see we get that right there. But if we switch to, say, regular actor 1, and we go up to actor 4, nothing happens again until we go up to the correct one. So again, that's another tool for seeing exactly what is happening in your code and when your code is being ran. It can be a very useful tool, especially again if you have a large branch network, and that is how you properly use it with both your character and with different actors. Okay, now we've gone over a lot of tools specifically for Unreal. They're going to help you debug your code and figure out what's going on. But I just wanted to go over a very classical technique to go over your code, something that's called the rubber duck technique. Now this has been used for a very long time. It's originated in more traditional coding, C++ and stuff like that. But it's basically can be used in any coding language, including node networks, including blueprints. So the fundamental idea is you go through your code, and line by line, or in this case, node by node, you explain what you're doing out loud as if you were talking to a rubber duck. Basically, you go through your code and you basically dumb it down and say, this is what this is doing, this is what this is doing, this is what this is doing, this is what this is doing. And this is a very important technique because often when you're programming, you can very much get lost in what you're doing and what the actual code is doing when you just put down a bunch of nodes, especially if you're following a tutorial. You might just be putting down the exact nodes that they're doing, and you might not be understanding the logic behind it. So just taking a moment to look at your code and really break down exactly what's happening is a great technique. So example, I'll do something very simple. I'll do this code that's basically just pausing the game. So I would start here. I would say, okay, I am having an action input. That means that when the character is pressing a certain button, it will cause this action when it is pressed. When it is pressed, we'll go to the next node where it is going to set the game as paused. What this does is going to check this boolean to see if it's true or false, and if it is true, it is going to pause the game. Now, if it pauses the game, what we're going to do is we're going to create a widget. This is going to create the pause menu, and we're then going to take this and add it to the viewport, meaning that the player is going to be able to see the widget and it's going to be on their screen. The next step is to get player controller. We need a reference to that because we need to show the character's mouse, which we're then going to do here. We are going to set the show mouse cursor to true. That way the player can see their mouse when it is on screen. And then finally, we are going to set the input mode so that the mouse is focused in on the widget so that the mouse functions properly. Right, so that is an example of the rubber duck technique, just going through node by node and saying, this is what this node does, this is what this node does. And it's going to help you understand why your code is happening. It's going to understand the logic of your code. And if your code's not working, it can reveal, oh, this is why it's not working because I need to be doing this, but the code's actually doing this. So that's just a more classical technique. It's not really a tool, but it's something that's very, very helpful and that I use almost every time I code. When I get lost in what I'm doing, is just I sit down and I say out loud, okay, this is what this is doing, this is what this is doing, and this is what this is doing. So that is the rubber duck technique. All right, so that's going to do it for this video. I just wanted to give you some information about debugging. I've been doing a lot of debugging in both my professional and personal work lately. So I wanted to share some of the tools that I've learned to help you fix your code and get it to where the game is running the way that you want it to run. So I hoped you learned a lot about the tips, tricks, and techniques to debugging your code in Unreal Engine 5.